Hello and welcome to another episode of Fishing for Answers. Today we've got Michael Levin with us, the founder of Center for Information Security Awareness here, to talk about all things eighth layer. But before we get into the human element of cybersecurity, Michael, maybe you could tell us a little bit about your background. I know you've got a really cool, exciting background, and I think my viewers would love to hear about it.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. I was a police officer in Silicon Valley from 1978 to 1985. And if you think of the Valley, if you know anything about the Valley, at that time it was still cherry trees and orchards. We watched the big businesses come in there. And I was a police officer for just a few years in uniform. And then I ended up being a detective and then on a SWAT team and doing all kinds of fun, interesting things. But we started to work with some of the cybersecurity companies in Mountain View, California, which is where I was. And we learned right then and there, we didn't know anything about chips and main hard drives. And, it was all new stuff. There was no college degrees at that time. And I ended up getting hired in 1985 by the Secret Service. I had a big counterfeit case as a detective, as a police officer, and I got introduced to a bunch of Secret Service guys. And
It's
I
really
ended
like
up,
the movies where the local cop does a good job, and then the feds are like, "Hey, we want to hire you."
yeah, I was kind of like that. I mean, I had long hair at the time, and
I still do.
we had arrested a guy. Yeah, when I had hair. We arrested a guy for counterfeiting, and this was back in the day when you had to actually print counterfeit money in a printing press. It was before color copiers and printers. You actually had to have a talent and do plates and negatives, and it was a big deal. So Secret Service came out, and we ended up flipping the guy and getting into the printer, and then making a good seizure of counterfeit at the printing press where the guy's print shop was. And I got to be friends with some of the Secret Service guys, and they basically recruited me out of the police department. And I went through the Secret Service, training academy, whatever. And then they sent me back to the Bay Area, and I actually ended up working in the San Jose field office. So a lot of people don't know this, but the Secret Service has joint jurisdiction with the FBI. At the time, it was called access device fraud. So it was everything from credit cards to, in the old days, when you had a modem and there was all kinds of ways to cheat the system to get into bulletin boards and things like that. The best way to do it was to have phone account numbers that would allow you to make long distance calls to hack into different modems, basically. So the Secret Service was, charged with investigating that along with the FBI at the time. And none of the old guys wanted to do that. So they threw it in the lap of the new guy, and we had to learn. And I told people it was like walking in the dark, because you didn't have a cell phone at that time. There was no desktop computers at that time. There was just mainframes and minis, big buildings that were computers. And when they got hacked, they would come into the Secret Service office with, 5 attorneys and 10 employees, and they would tell us a story. And we were like, what's a modem? It was like, you really didn't know. And then, so we had to get,
There weren't really
private,
laws against it back then either, so they
right.
didn't
Yeah,
even have a
there was.
legal system in place to put people behind bars.
Right. They were just creating in 1984, 1985, they started to create new laws, 18 USC 1029 and 1030, where the codes, the statutes that were used. But, we just didn't know what we were doing. So we were able to partner with some private sector people that were experts in these different areas that could come in. They became trusted partners, and they would teach us. They would spend time with us, because once again, there's no college courses, there's no there's no private sector companies teaching this stuff. So we use these, the experts that were there in these different organizations. And I developed some expertise in that. I got transferred to Washington, D.C. to the computer section at the Secret Service. So I actually worked in the computer section. Then I did what all Secret Service guys have to do, is I worked in protection for 6 years in the White House during the Clinton administration. I worked at the CIA for 2 years as the intelligence liaison agent between the Secret Service and the CIA. And then went to Seattle for 5 years, was transferred to Seattle, and I worked at a task force at Microsoft by chance with the FBI. So we had an FBI Secret Service task force, and we ended up chasing the people that were attacking Microsoft. So zero-day exploits at Microsoft. They were considered the big victim in a lot of the cybercrime at that time. So the U.S. Attorney's Office created this task force, and we, chased after the hackers that were going after, zero-day exploits at Microsoft. So back to Washington, D.C., and I managed the Secret Service Electronic Crimes Task Force. Then my last job at Secret Service, they detailed me to Homeland Security, and I was a deputy director at the National Cybersecurity Division, which is now CISA. Back then it was called NCSD, and then they changed the name to CISA. Retired from the government, and I ended up going to work for Microsoft for 9 years. And but right when I retired, I started this business, Center for Information Security Awareness. We had other partners. Everybody was doing it as a side gig. So we all had day jobs, but we believed that cybersecurity awareness training was the wave of the future and an important thing to offer. So we started off not for profit, and we were giving away the training. We gave it away for the first few years. And then over time, everybody, kind of the other partners got tired of it, and they all gave up, but I stuck with it. And eventually left the Microsoft job, and now I just run the company full time.
Well, that's awesome. And as an entrepreneur, I can say that the most important skill that you must have as an entrepreneur is just willpower. You got to stick with it no matter how hard it gets, because it's not easy. If it was easy to build a company, everyone would do it, right? And so just very cool story. I imagine so. You started at a security awareness company right after you got out of the Secret Service. So you were investigating nonstop incidents, it sounds like, while you were in the Secret Service. Most of them had a human element, correct? There must have been something that gave you that passion around security awareness. Talk to me about that.
Yeah, well, it's interesting. Actually, when I was at Homeland Security, and I was running the law, they called it the Law Enforcement and Intelligence Branch. So everybody in law enforcement, all the federal agencies in law enforcement and the intelligence community was, working together at this time for cybersecurity. And we decided that police officers had no idea about what to tell people when they got a call of some sort of a hack. And so, and often that's what employees, companies do, is they call the police department.
Yeah.
And so we wanted to do training in every police academy. So that was kind of our mandate to try to get that done. We could never get funding for it. So one of the things that I did when I retired was start this business, because A, I saw this huge need, but B, because at that time, there was really there wasn't very many companies doing it. I mean, SANS was around, a few of the other companies were around, but no one was just focused on how do we educate people day to day. If they didn't grow up with a phone, they didn't grow up with a computer, like especially old people. I mean, I do presentations all the time for senior citizens where I try to get them up to speed, but no one was taking the time in the government to actually educate people, and it wasn't being taught in schools. So how do we get from, you know, what we do every day on the phone and, computers, how do we make it so that it's more safe for people and we reduce risk?
We actually got to work with a group called cyber.org, and cyber.org is funded by CISA. And sorry, here. And it's funded by CISA, and their whole mission is to educate students. And we're talking K through 12, starting as early as second grade. And it's talking about things like who are the people that you're meeting in your game chat rooms, and what type of people are online, and what do we need to be afraid of, and just different things like that. And so we actually got to work with them. We created a ton of different videos that were aimed at everywhere from second grade to 12th grade, and it was just to me, one of my favorite projects I did in 2024 was that. And while there's no income off of it, I really feel so passionately that we've got to get into the schools, because when you look at the average corporation or the average enterprise, what you see is that the 2 most vulnerable groups are the oldest people in their organization and the youngest people in their organization. So, I've heard a lot of people say, well, logically, it seems like the younger generation would be more secure because they grew up on it. It's actually goes the opposite direction, because they're so confident, that, or maybe confidence the wrong word, maybe it's apathetic, like, they just don't care. They've grow up on it, they'll click on anything, it's just whatever. And so that's part of the reason I think we've gotta get out there, we've got to talk to them. And I even had this college student come to me and say, "Hey, me and all of my friends fell for the same scam." And her big point was that we gotta, normalize talking about falling for these things so that we can share that information. But to me, it also just showed that they're a very vulnerable group, and they're our future. So we do need to worry about making sure that they have the skills they need to avoid these attacks.
Yeah, 100%. I agree. I mean, the bottom line is, everybody needs to focus on it. And
It's
we,
everybody's job. I don't care what
yeah,
job you have.
yeah,
Cybersecurity is part
and
of
it
it.
really hasn't. We haven't. I don't think we've done a good job as a society keeping people up to speed when it comes to day to day risk.
We've done
Um,
we've done a terrible job as a society in that regard, but continue.
Yeah, no, I mean, the funny thing in with young teenagers in particular is they don't care until they're victimized. And
Yes.
then once they screw up, they give all their girlfriends their password and they're on, they come on their, social
My
media
my
account.
brother-in-law has
And
fallen for these things like 60 times. I mean, the same scam. He'll fall for 3 times in 1 week.
yeah,
But jokes on my brother-in-law aside, they're very bad, and they prey on people. And the more trusting the person is, the more likely they are to fall for things like that too. And I
yeah,
mean, that is my brother-in-law's biggest issue, is that he's overly trusting. And
yeah,
he'll sit there, because it's funny, my wife will be like, "Hey, you know what we do for a living, right?" And and she'll explain it to him, and she'll say, "It's a scam," and he's like, "No, you just don't trust people enough. You gotta learn to open your heart." And it's like, "Well, you gotta learn to close your wallet."
yeah.
Uh, but no, I think that it's just it really goes to show that we do have to do a better job. Now, I think the problem is who we have doing the training. I get the impression that you probably understand psychology and behavioral science a decent bit, or a good bit, probably largely due to some of the training you got at the Secret Service. But that being said, to me, that is the most important part of security awareness. And what I find, or what my experience has been, is that it's lost. It's not in most programs. And what we do is we take that very technical person and we put them in charge of security awareness. And what happens is because they're so technical, they get into the weeds and they lose the audience instantly. And I think they tend to be overly punitive too. I mean, the first thing you learn in IT is that the user is the problem. You hear phrases like "you can't patch stupid," "pebcac," "problem exists between keyboard and chair," ID10T or "idiot error." There's a million different phrases like this across IT, but I think it actually comes out in our behavior toward users, and I think that's part of the reason that we have issues where users just don't like the training, they don't want to participate, they turn off. And I think if we approach them differently, they're less likely to turn off. And I think part of it is addressing them, not addressing the whole organization, but addressing them personally. It just to me, it makes so much of a difference when it's personal, if that makes any sense.
Of course, yeah. I mean, when I look at the IT professionals that are, tasked with the role of providing some form of cybersecurity awareness training, frequently they have no credibility with the end user, just because of the nature of where they are, who they are. Maybe they're not articulate. Maybe they don't have any energy. I'm kind of generalizing, but
Well, there's a lot of
ultimately,
introverts in this industry that are not outgoing. They're not social. They're not going to come to you in that upbeat sort of manner.
right, they may be great at managing the network, but they are
Mhm.
not people persons. So what they need is somebody that's a good people person that can articulate everything from uh, what's the risk at home, how do you protect your bank account. That's what the employees care about. So
Yeah.
you have to use those kinds of examples to get them to understand the risk at work as well. So, I get hired to do in person training, and we go out and I talk to a lot of employees, and I really understand, I think, now what it takes to make them get engaged in cybersecurity and day to day stuff. And I've got, I always ask them for reviews. I tell me the good and the bad. I want to know everything, and it's almost 100% positive because we're talking about the day to day stuff that's relevant. Skimming at a gas pump, ATM skimming, the thing, identity theft. All these things that are interrelated to the problems we're having at work. I mean,
Well,
it,
and it's not and, they're not independent islands. The security you have at your home and your personal security can impact your organization and vice versa. So, I do think that's an incredibly important part, and, one thing that every or almost everyone I bring on this show, highlights, and I think it's critical for anybody doing security awareness training, and it's something that you just said was connect it to their personal life. Talk about how to help their elderly parents avoid scams or a gas pump, avoid the pin skimmer. I think those things are incredibly important. And I think it goes along the same lines as a study I saw that actually said that people are, or I'm sorry, let me phrase this correctly, that you can increase retention on training by 15x just simply by connecting it to their day-to-day job. And so if I go from, "Hey, here's just generic security awareness training," to, "Hey, finance team, let me talk about a few financial fraud attacks that are targeting you," it changes it immensely and actually makes it 15 times more effective. Now, I gotta imagine that connecting it to their home life is the exact same thing. And I think that's why it's important because if they don't understand why, they're not going to react.
yeah, I think the other thing I just wanted to mention about, you have an IT manager. And you know, in the eyes of the employees, they may not have credibility. So using a person or an organization that has credibility, I start off all my presentations with I've actually interviewed hundreds of hackers. So I've talked to these people and I've tried to understand why they're doing what they're doing to try to trick you. And so if you understand that, I think you can design good training that's going to be of value for the end user. And I think that, I mean, ultimately, I'm not a big fan of Know Before, but Know Before partnered with Kevin Mitnick for a reason, because they believed that he was going to add credibility to their business, and it ended up working for them. I'm not a big fan of hiring ex-felons, but ultimately it worked for them because they believed that the credibility of this hacker was important, that
Did
he
you
knew
know
what
that
he
they
was
had to
talking about.
fire him officially when they went public?
Well, I'm sure that the investors maybe required it.
It's, I believe it was actually the SEC, requirements that you can't have a, convicted felon as a board advisor.
Well, there you go. So ultimately, but they had already, they went public, so they had already, got where they wanted to be. So,
Yeah.
but my point that I think is really relevant, that I find why companies actually hire me, is because of my experience in the Secret Service and my ability to talk to people and relate with people. I believe e-learning is still a good option because it teaches the employees the why. One of the things that I think a lot of the snippet training misses is they never teach the employees why. So the employees don't really have the same skin in the game as if they understand the why.
Well,
Um,
and I
and-
think that most companies, they only tell the person when they're doing bad. They never tell them when they're doing something right.
Right. Yeah, no, I think that the concept of rewarding the employees that are doing things right is a good thing. Don't get me wrong there, but I think that when you ask employees what's important to them, they're going to tell you all their home stuff and protecting their bank accounts and their credit card accounts. They don't understand why you have rules at work that make their job maybe a little more cumbersome or complicated. So once they understand the reasoning behind strong passwords or something that makes their life a little more difficult, or they perceive it as such, they need to understand why the importance of good passwords is of value.
Yeah, no,
Um,
I
you can't just say you need a 18 character password without explaining to them why,
yeah.
and letting them understand the risk of why.
Yeah, no, one of the things that we do, um, all of our training is like 30 seconds, 15 seconds, 45 seconds. And one thing that we learned, and it really goes, directly in line with what you're saying, is because I spent my career as an ethical hacker, worked for a bunch of different government agencies, a bunch of very large, corporations, and so I see that ethical hacker perspective. But we baked those ethical hacking stories into our training because what we realized was that people don't wanna hear about how to build a perfect password. But what they do wanna hear is about what happened to Joe from HR when he used a terrible password. And we found that that is one of the most effective ways is just telling stories. And you see it. I mean, it's storytelling has always been an effective way to get lessons across. But I do want to make sure we hit on a couple of the common topics that we have in every episode here. Um, so one of my favorite questions to ask is I know we all live in shades of gray, but we're going to pretend it's a black and white world. And so the question is, if you could only use one, carrot or stick, what would it be?
I'm going to always go the path of least resistance, and I'm going to say the carrot because, you know, some of the best examples of successful, how do you get your employees to buy into your cybersecurity awareness training is have a lunch and give them pizza or do something that brings them together and
Food
and that
certainly
is
helps.
and entertaining, or I mean for large, huge 10,000 100,000 employee companies, obviously you can't do that, but for the small medium enterprises, they really should be trying to create a culture of cybersecurity and security. So physical security and cybersecurity, I believe, go hand in hand. You have to have the same concept. I mean, tailgating and hackers, crooks walking through the office stealing laptops and computers is a problem. So that's part of physical security. The other thing that we like that I've been talking about with some companies is workplace violence. We're starting to see, and it's documented again and again and again, whether it's in a school, whether it's in a workplace, people are identifying that they're going to commit violence on social media. Maybe they send an email. And so that's part of the training that we do is
It
to
has.
educate the users on, well, if Joe says he's going to, smack his boss, you got to take stuff like that seriously in this day and age. And you have to get into the situation of reporting it to HR, reporting it to your manager. So it's things like that. I think everything holistically has to be wrapped together so that, once again, it explains the why to the employees, and it does a much better job of helping create a cohesive security environment within an organization. And when you have an employee that is successful or fends off a phishing attack that ended up being ransomware potentially, you want to highlight that employee and give them an attaboy. Yeah, give them an attaboy and tell them, and let people know that, hey, we were successful. And when you have bad things happen,
You
you
got
got to tell people we just had an attempt, or we actually just basically, especially in the finance department for electronic fund transfer fraud, we do a lot of training in that as well. That you mentioned
That's
it
what
also,
keeps
but
CISOs up at night is what happens if my finance team sends $1 million wire out to the wrong place?
yeah, so we want to talk about, past attacks that are legitimate within the company, problems nearby. Maybe a city government just got scammed and it's in the news, so we want to use that as an example. We want to show them that there really is a problem in this area and they got to pay attention. And so I think that the carrot is the answer. I think that people they don't want to be victimized. They don't want to be, and they don't want to be the one that clicked on the ransomware email.
No,
They don't want, most employees, I think, or maybe all employees, do not want to be that person. So whether they're
no
naive,
one wants to be that person.
yeah, whether they're naive or gullible or whatever, they really do want to not be that person, and we've got to do a better job of giving them the tools,
Yeah.
and
And
do
not
a better
blaming
job
them
of
because we
educating.
didn't give them the tools too. I see so much of that where, they have annual once a year security awareness training. That's great, but nothing in between for the next 11 months. And then it's the employee's fault when they click 9 months in. To me, I don't see that as being the employee's fault. I truly see that as the fault of whoever's in charge of that program. But I also see it as a failure of our industry. The industry itself focuses so heavily on the technical magical box or magic bullet that's just going to fix everything. And the reality is that cybersecurity is very non-technical. It is all about humans. When you talk to any hacker, they will tell you that it's not just the mistakes of the user. It may be the mistakes of the user that get us into the network, but it's the mistakes of IT that get us full control of everything. And it's the, lack of staying on top of tradecraft that is why we don't get detected. So, it really impacts us at every layer. And that's why I think it's so critical that we train our IT teams about those common threats so that they're not using password spreadsheets, so that they're not using the same local admin password on every machine in their network, so that they're not using the same account for, that's a domain admin for their regular credentials, just logging into everything in the network. It's little things like that that can make a world of difference when the attackers get into your network. Are they stuck or are they quickly going to be able to start moving around your network and escalating their privileges? And I think the difference between being stuck and being in a great place is largely training. Yes, some of that training is about how to harden systems and it relies on users actually doing it, but I still think it starts with training because if they're not even aware, how can they do it?
Yeah, when we talk to folks that are interested in training, maybe it's a manager and they always want to tell me what they know, right? So they want to say, oh, the employees are my weakest link. And what I always try to correct them to say is, your employees are not your weakest link. Your employees are just the largest attack vector. And where you have to get away from this browbeating of employees as the weakest link concept. I don't think that helps because then you're going in with the wrong attitude. Your
Right, you've
attitude should be,
accepted failure before you even ever start,
yeah,
and not only that, you've accepted failure and you've pointed fingers. Like, "Oh, it's not me, not my fault."
yeah, we've just got to do a much better job of engaging the employees and understanding what their concerns are associated to, if they're getting bombarded with phishing testing and it's wearing them out. And I've talked to employees and they say, oh, I'm so sick of the damn phishing testing. Um, I think that it's time to slow down and figure out, well, why do we have to do that? And is there another alternative? Could I just train them? Could I do in-person training? Could I do a webinar that would help them?
I
Could
can
I?
answer that question, "Why do we have to do it?" Um, have you ever heard of identical elements theory?
No.
So, have you ever bought a new car and the second you drive it off the lot, you start seeing that new car everywhere, everyone's driving it?
Right.
That's identical elements theory, and it talks about how when you learn about something really well, you're gonna start seeing it everywhere. So, the reason to me that we fish our users for education is to run simulations so that they can learn about urgency really well, so that they can learn about, fake senders or spoofing senders really well. And what happens is when they learn about that attack really well, they start seeing it everywhere. And the subconscious is our body's natural defense mechanism, and it can be tuned to defend us against anything, and that includes cyber attacks. So, if we want to be able to detect it, we have to run those simulations, which create that subconscious sort of reaction, and literally train the body's subconscious to react and say, "Okay, I don't like that." And so to me, I think the number one thing we've gotta train our users on is trust your gut, and then we have to run those phishing simulations. Now,
Yeah,
that
but
being
let me
said,
let me just
I
let
think
me interrupt for a second. The trust the gut thing. This is the problem in what we're doing. So, when your physical safety is in jeopardy based on your life experiences. Ever since you were a little kid, you were told, look both ways before you cross the street. You see movies where people get
and that's
robbed
the
when they
reason
walk.
we've gotta be training people about
All right, but
cybersecurity
let me
from
finish
grade
my point here.
but go ahead.
So you walk through down the dark alley and you get a gut feeling that you're safety. You look down this dark alley and you see some shady characters down there. Based on your life experience, you get a gut feeling. And I think gut feeling is important. But ultimately, unless we're giving the employees the training, they will never have the gut feeling.
So
So
that
it's not just phishing testing. And I'm not saying I'm not a proponent of phishing testing, but I'm a bigger proponent of training
well,
and education.
so let me finish what I was saying about the phishing. I think that the phishing is incredibly important, but it's almost always done in a very wrong way. I say that because I see phishing as traditionally, or at least 90% of the time, a very, very negative experience for employees. Often they don't have just in time education or training along with it. They've got a landing page that will see if they'll type in their credentials. So we're exploiting users. Why I don't like that, other than in a pen test, is because at the moment a mistake is realized, there's quite literally a chemical reaction happening in your brain, but there's an emotional response. That emotional response makes you uniquely susceptible to learning. And so, if we have really good just in time training on that landing page or in an email that's in their inbox the second they click, we're helping to train them and give them those tools that they need. The other thing I'll point out is that I truly believe that phishing needs to be gamified. One of the things that we've done at Fish Firewall is we gamified phishing a long time ago. I don't know, early on, we sent a fish. We had a bunch of people upset. We huddled internally and we said, okay, how do we prevent this from happening again? And we realized that if we reached out to the user, we said, hey, let me tell you about this fish that pretends to be from your IT team, and then we say, now be on the lookout because the next time you see it, it might be from me or it could be the real bad guys trying to get you. It not only de weaponizes this potentially negative situation, but it makes sure that they're aware, and it creates a sort of hyper vigilance. And now they're looking for it. And that's part of the reason I think how we go about fishing is incredibly important. If you don't have that just in time training, if you're not tailoring the fishing simulations to at least the roles in your organization, and ideally the individual, there's a lot being missed out on. And often what happens is we're bothering them with noise instead of fishing them with the type of fish that they're most likely to click on. And so I think we've been doing it wrong, and that's the reason employees don't like it. And I think we also have never taken enough time to explain to them why we run these simulations. And the math, or the not the math, but the studies all show that when you run the simulation and you have that just-in-time training, people are over 70% less likely to fall for that same type of fish if they see it again in the wild. And so that's why I think we run it. But the training, to your point, is the most important part of that fish. And if you don't have the training, then you're just abusing your users and for no reason. And I would completely agree with you that if you're not doing it for training and it's not part of a pen test, what is the point? Why are we phishing our users?
Yeah, and I think that the training has to evolve with the threats. I think that when there's new, like you have AI threat zone up right now.
Yeah, I was
um,
trying to get to that a little while ago,
yeah,
but
and so the
great.
concept is, a lot of old training is not talking about AI and the risks of
None
AI.
of it is.
Um,
I've still
well, we
seen
have some
training that talks
training
about
that's
chicken.
actually, we have a whole module on AI threat. So, but I'm just saying the concept has to be that when an IT manager is seeing certain types of attacks, we got to make sure we're training our people on those attacks. The other one is QR code fraud. We're seeing a ton of that, and very few training organizations are even talking about it. So,
Often that needs to
as
be customized a little bit more to the individual, but I agree. That's your frontline people, and particularly, like, in retail and stuff like that, they see that constantly, and they're the people that almost never get security awareness training.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that we do is credit card compliance training, and we also do HIPAA training. But for anybody that's handling credit cards, they are, like you said, the front line. And if we're not educating them about, what to look for and how to not be have the organization victimized, I think we're really dropping the ball as an industry. Um, the AI threat zone. I mean, the FBI just put out something release fairly recently about if someone you get a call from your grandchild and they're saying they need money, wire me money, you should have a code word with them so that you'd say, well, what's the code word? And or they have to use the code word before you would know that it's really them. We need to have that for everybody, and that should be
And at
also
an organizational level too, but though a lot of policy. I think low tech is how we solve the deep fake problem. Like you said,
yeah,
code words,
100%.
policy,
But
procedure, like no wires going out without this, this, and this happening.
right. And I'm always surprised when I talk to companies and I say, well, what do you have a policy on wiring money? And most of them
No.
don't even have a policy, right? So I said, well, that's kind of the first thing you need to do is create a policy. I'm a big fan of acceptable use policy statements. So you should have your employees sign an acceptable use policy statement every year, and that's going to articulate to
Yeah,
them all the different things that they can and cannot do with work resources. Is it okay for your employees to leave their laptop in their car overnight in downtown Detroit? Is it okay for your employees to let their kids use their work laptop? These are all policy things that many organizations are not wrestling with. They haven't thought about, and they're causing a lot of problems for those organizations. So,
yeah.
bringing in somebody that really has been doing this a long time, like both of us have, um, will add value to that organization and definitely reduce their risk.
I will say I went a little bit different direction with my clients. They all have actual AI policies. But whether it's in your acceptable use or a separate AI policy, you've got to be talking about AI. You've got to be telling your users how they can use it and not just, hey, you can't use it because they're going to use it. So
Right.
I think part of this is making and clearing a safe way for them to be able to do it. But one of the things that I bring up all the time because I think it's the best example of how quickly things have changed is that a year and a half ago, typos were still one of the top indicators of a fish, and just 18 months later it's the opposite. In fact, typos now indicate it's a real human behind it. And the perfectly typed, 0 typo, well-written, document, that is more likely the fish now. And so, I mean, it's changed so drastically, and AI not only is changing the phishing with what I see, like, highly sophisticated, phishing attacks. The new person in finance goes and updates their LinkedIn, and within an hour, they are being texted from a local number that is, saying it's their boss or the CEO of the company. Um, that to me is a decent level of sophistication when, within 1 hour of updating LinkedIn, you're already targeting people. But I see it go even to other levels now where they know what your role in the organization is. They know the organizational hierarchy and structure, and they use that against you. And so I'm already seeing what I could only define as AI-driven role-based phishing. And no, I'm not selling that. That is a feature we have. But I'm seeing that happen in the wild. I'm seeing our people be targeted every day. IBM just said that their attacks were up 750% in the last 12 months. That's an incredible number. That means that AI has increased the amount of attacks 750% in just 1 year. I mean, what's it gonna do in the next year as, we get more edge AI capabilities? I mean, just today, an open source, large language model was dropped that is smarter than 4.0. It's great at coding, and it's very, very small. The more modularized and open source, really good large language models we see, that to me, that those are instantly being turned into malicious tools. And so I don't know. It's going to be interesting to see what the future holds. I'm very optimistic, though. It's not just all doom and gloom. I do think that there's opportunity around AI. I love, I mean, I'm in the education space, but for me, education is a great use case for AI and being able to adapt to the individual and things like that. But it'll be interesting to see how it changes things because I don't know about you, but I can barely keep up. Every day there's new, insane news about technology lately. And I mean, supposedly AGI is here. Did you hear that?
No, I didn't. But one of the things that I want to get back to just a little bit is the human piece of this. And, making employees understand that the biggest, riskiest email is going to be from a name they recognize. And that getting that point across in the training is really important. When I worked in the government, obviously we're involved in investigating the advanced persistent threat. The concept of these foreign adversaries getting into the DoD systems or the government systems and traversing the networks. Well, a lot of private sector companies have that problem as well. But what the bad guys are doing, or what they've been doing for years, is getting email lists and then going to Gmail and creating Gmail accounts in names that people will recognize. And I think you have to use good examples. And a good example would be you're on Facebook and you like someone's picture and they're a friend of yours. And 10 minutes later, you get an email from a Gmail account from that person's name, but maybe it's got a number at the end, but it's a name of a person you just liked. And it says, "Thanks for liking my picture. Check this one out."
Yeah.
And now most employees would click on that because they
And
would say,
half the time that link is actually gonna go to Snapchat because, most of the attacks I see are abusing open redirects, and so they're going to link through a reputable site that and that's part of what makes it that much more, difficult to educate the user on is that, well, most of the time hovering works, but some of the time
it does.
hovering doesn't work, and,
Right.
uh I don't know. I avoid those complications, those exceptions or edge cases with users just because I find it's easier to just, "Hey, hover."
I think if you just give them the tools, you just give them, do X, Y, Z. When in doubt, give them a call.
Yeah,
Before you click on that PDF, before you click on that link, why not just call John Jones and say, "Hey, John, I just got this weird email from Gmail. You've never sent it to me. Looks a little shady." That hopefully that gut feeling kicks in. John, did you send that message? No. Okay, forward it to IT or delete it. Kind of a concept. And I think educating the users as just it starts creating this exponential growth of their ability to understand and to grab that gut feeling. And that's what I'm so passionate about. That's what we try to do in our training and in our business is, when I leave a business, I want to make sure that I have the bobbing heads, everybody's in agreement, but B, that we're in a situation where people are saying that was actually cool training. That
yeah.
was actually good. I got something out of that. I learned how to protect my bank account, but I also learned what not to click on at work or what to do if I get something weird.
Yeah.
And I think we got to get back to basics in some ways.
Well, I couldn't agree more, and I think it starts and it should really, really focus heavily on basics. I think one of my, uh things that I learned early on and getting into the awareness sector was just that so so often we overcomplicate and what the user needs to hear is not, "Hey, here are 12 different ways to avoid clicking on a fish." It's think before you click. It's trust your gut. It's, "Hey, urgency is going to be used against you. Authority will be used against you." And when they understand the core elements, it makes them so much more empowered to identify and to report. And I know one of the things that we do is we deploy the reporting button. And whenever somebody reports one of ours or a real one, they're immediately praised. And I think that's one of the things that's so critical is praising your users. We've got to build their confidence and not tear it down. There's this concept called learned helplessness that I'm fascinated about when it comes to cybersecurity awareness. Because what I realized was that there are these groups of users in heavily punitive environments, not everywhere, but just, the more punitive environments where they might have like a three strikes and you're out, three strikes and you're fired policy on phishing. So what I found was that you can take somebody who's really proud of their ability to detect a scam, and they'll talk about it. Man, I'll spot that a mile away. Well, now IT comes in and they bought this new phishing tool, and they're like, "Hey, we got this internal employee game competition going on. Let's write a fish about that." And so they take all this inside information, they send this fish, it's perfect, there's no indicators whatsoever. There's no landing page to train them or anything like that, and so the user falls for it, and then they fall for it again, and then they fall for it again. And what happens is a couple times into it, maybe the 2nd, 3rd, 4th time, they go, "Well, maybe I'm not so good at detecting these things." And the second they say that to themselves, they become less secure because that sense of pride that made them more secure is now gone. We sort of beat it out of them. And I think, learned helplessness may be an extreme example, but I've seen it happen in enterprise environments. And I think it's just a really good thing to keep in the back of our heads is, what is the goal? Are we trying to trick them, or are we trying to help them learn how to detect fish? And I think that's a big difference in approach. And I think too often we're not asking ourselves, what is the goal of this phishing simulation?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think fishing is in my eyes kind of a narrow direction to go, and it has to be more 360 holistic. And the concept that things like, free Wi-Fi security,
Oh, absolutely.
password security, protecting your device, working from home, having a router at home that has default passwords on it.
Yeah. I,
Managers responsible, IT managers responsible for that, and creating an environment so that employees actually, if they have that problem at home, they're VPNing in, and then they're going to dinner somewhere and leaving the computer attached. No one's told them, hey, you need to log off or you need to lock your computer.
yeah.
So we need to do that. That has to be in the policy statement, and that those are the types of things.
And in the training, yeah.
Yeah, and the training, because what happens is we get very narrow on phishing training for a lot of companies, and the employees need to understand the whole picture.
Yeah.
And so I'm obviously a big advocate of that. I believe that once again, getting into protecting your bank account. I even talk about the risks of using an ATM card. I mean, ATM cards have no Consumer Protection Act on them, and they're tied directly to your bank account. Why not use a credit card where you have a consumer protection that will give you your money right away, as
Yeah.
opposed to fighting with the bank? And once again, the banks are now not, they're fighting. If you screw up, and you get a text message and you start ending up talking to a hacker, and you end up giving them access to your bank account, banks are starting to decline those. And so I think when the employees start to hear stuff like that, it's like, oh boy, I better pay attention here. I better learn how to protect myself. And then the end result is the business gets protected as well.
So I agree completely. All training has to be 360 degrees. Focusing on those personal things are critical. One of the things I will say is the thing I love about phishing itself is that there aren't a lot of good KPIs in security awareness. The best KPI to me that I can measure to understand, okay, how security aware a culture is what is that report rate? So if I've sent you, 100 phishing emails and 90 of them were reported back, well, great. We've got a 90% report rate. That's a good number. But what if it was 10 of them were reported back and now we've got a 10% report rate? To me, that is the best indication of culture and one of the reasons that I focus on those things. And then I think, one of the better indications of awareness is just phishing susceptibility. To me, it's just one of those KPIs that you have a little bit of visibility into. Whereas almost all of the others are, to me, they're not very good. They don't tell you much. And I
Yeah,
think that's one of the issues here.
yeah, I think that, that's always an important piece of the puzzle. Everything you're talking about is an important piece of the puzzle. But once again, if, it gets back to the see something, say something concept that we've dealt with for so many years now, is how do I report stuff? What do I do if I have a gut feeling? Making sure that the employees understand all the different risks day to day and what to do when they come across one of these risks.
Yeah.
And a lot, sometimes if you just say, okay, send it to IT or delete it or whatever you're telling the employees to do, doesn't always solve the problem. So they have to have a better understanding of, what are the ramifications if I click on something? What are the ramifications if I, start opening up PDFs that I think are important related to work? What are the risks and what really could happen? How
And
does ransomware come into a company? And
and,
what,
and I
what
think
happens when ransomware hits us?
and I think those conversations often lead to finding additional exposure. I can't tell you how many times you're talking about, hey, what are the risks? And you maybe you give that example of an infected or a malicious PDF, and all of a sudden you'll have somebody in the audience raise their hand and be like, I open PDFs all day, every day for my job.
Right.
And we'll be like, "Okay," to the security team, "Well, did they have, a sandbox or any safe place to open them? Did
Yeah.
they have anything inspecting them?" And 9 times out of 10, it's, "Oh, no, I wasn't aware of that." And I know this is just one example, but, I think that is the other part of awareness that doesn't get much attention is the cease level sort of, I'm going to go evangelize to all of leadership why this is so important. And as you're having those individual conversations, you discover flaws and you discover business practices that may actually expose your organization to more risk. And so I think that's the call to being more extroverted in our industry is that if you're not out talking to people, you don't know your risk.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that one of the things about email that people forget is a lot of companies are not encrypting email. So, anything you say in email can be read, and you wouldn't put that information in a postcard. So, why would you put it in email? Email subject to legal process where, it could be front page of the news. I talk to boards periodically. And that's one of the first things I always tell them: don't say anything in email that you wouldn't want to read in the newspaper.
I'm an
Um,
executive. I am scared of having it subpoenaed, so I understand.
yeah, yeah, no, I
It's
mean, but
definitely people
this
where
is all, once again, when I talk about the 360 approach to security, this is a piece of that puzzle that a lot of security phishing testing companies are not hitting on. And so the end result is you are providing very narrow, potentially very narrow training when we need to provide that training in conjunction with other training that gives them the full 360 approach to everything in security, whether you're covering the NIST standards of what security awareness should be, My company is certified in the state of Texas, so they actually audit our e-learning every year and require that if you're doing business in the state of Texas with the government agency, your employees have to take this kind of training. So I believe in those concepts. I believe in that kind of a thought process where, yeah, you can do phishing testing. We want you to do phishing testing, but we also want you to do a holistic 360-degree training, which is going to cover the risks of AI, which is going to cover QR code fraud, which is going to cover all the things that are up and coming that are important, besides password protection, social engineering, all the things we've been doing. We need to include that with new risks that are occurring daily.
And I will say that's one of the reasons that I'm constantly talking about role-based training. Our IT teams need training. Our frontline defenders need training about like QR codes, for example. Our sensitive access users, whether it's the domain admins or your finance people, they need that. With great power comes great responsibility training. Our finance teams need training about financial fraud. Our HR teams need training about, protecting sensitive employee records or PII. And that's just scratching the surface. And so, yeah, couldn't agree with you more. Training, the traditional awareness training, to your point, is only the tip of the iceberg. In fact, we have an iceberg slide in all of our sales presentations for exactly that reason, and it has all these other threats, human threats underneath it. But you're absolutely right. Tip of the iceberg. I completely lost track of time here. We are
No
way
worries.
over time. But before we wrap, if you have any last words words of wisdom you'd love to leave with the audience here.
Yeah, I mean, I have 30 years of public service, and I've been in, like I said, I worked for Microsoft for 9 years, so I have a good flavor of the private sector. The goal for everybody really should be creating a environment within your organization where your employees are part of a team and your employees have skin in the game. And from my perspective, the best way to do that is to really sit down with the employees, educate them, understand what their concerns are, and then make sure that you're not only fulfilling your concerns, but you're fulfilling their security concerns, and creating an environment within your organization where A, they're not afraid to report stuff, and B, that they're trusted advocates for security. So, I'd say that in every one of my training presentations that we have to work as a team. We have to work as a community. If you hear about a new scam on the news, you should be sharing that with people around you. You should be sharing that with your kids and your family and your friends, the people that you care about, so they're not victimized. And I think we need to be a better
Or even if
community.
you fell for a scam, tell your friends. They may be being targeted by that exact same thing. Like the student who had 4 friends that fell for the exact same scam, same person. Any one of them could have talked about it and prevented that.
Yeah, 100%. And so I'm big about the community and creating a community within your organization where people actually talk about this stuff and have some
All
value add from learning about, being scammed. And whenever I'm giving an in-person presentation, I always ask the audience, has anybody been scammed recently? And then people will stand up and they'll actually tell a story, and then that may get somebody else thinking about something. And so it shows the community. It shows that we can all be victimized and we need to work together. In the old days, they used to have neighborhood watch, right? So you would have, all the neighbors would watch out for each other. They would have, a place where the kids could run to at a neighbor's house if they needed to. We need to create a neighborhood watch program for cybersecurity and for the risks within an organization so that we can better understand what people are thinking when they're making mistakes and better teach them how to do a better job of not being victimized.
I couldn't agree more. Hey, this has been a phenomenal episode. Thank you so much for joining me here today. For everyone joining us online, thank you. Have a great day, and we'll see you next year.